The billionaire CEO thought he was infertile his entire life, until a 4-year-old girl with his eyes called him Daddy. Henry Weston stepped out of the sleek black town car, his polished Italian shoes landing softly on the familiar cobblestone driveway of his estate. The sun was low in the afternoon sky, casting golden reflections on the glass windows of the mansion. Birds chirped somewhere in the trees, and the scent of freshly trimmed hedges lingered in the air. Everything looked exactly as he had left it 2 weeks ago. Precise, quiet, in control. He exhaled slowly, adjusting the cuff of his light-colored suit, which was just slightly creased from the long flight back from Europe. Jet lag tugged at his shoulders, but it was no match for the chill that had begun to snake up his spine. Something felt wrong. The gates had opened a few seconds too late. The security guard hadn't made eye contact, and the air, as perfectly manicured as it was, felt heavier than usual, as if something unseen had shifted during his absence. He walked slowly past the fountain, a stone structure he'd had imported from Florence, not because he cared about fountains, but because someone had told him it would increase the property value. His fingers grazed the smooth railing as he moved toward the garden that had always been Thomas Reeves's domain. Thomas had been his gardener for over a decade, reliable, private, invisible in the way good help was expected to be in Henry's world. So when Henry rounded the corner and saw Thomas standing awkwardly by the flower beds with someone, a child, his breath caught. She was small, no more than 4 years old, dressed in a pale blue dress with little ruffles at the sleeves and scuffed white shoes. She stood by the base of the marble statue, turning a rock over in her hands, completely unaware that her very presence had shifted something tectonic in Henry's world. She looked up. That was when it hit him. The girl had dark, wavy hair that fell just past her shoulders. Her eyes, large, round, and impossibly familiar, locked with his, brown, deep, identical to his own. A chill passed through his chest like a lightning strike. His feet halted mid-step. He felt the breath leave his body. The child tilted her head, blinking at him, as though recognizing something too. Then, with absolute clarity, she whispered one word. "Daddy!" Time cracked. Thomas stepped forward, panic on his face, but he was too late to stop the moment. Henry didn't speak. He couldn't. The world around him had dulled. The birds were still chirping. The breeze still rustled the leaves. But all he could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding in his ears. "Mr. Weston," Thomas began, voice shaking. Henry raised a hand slightly. "Stop!" The child was watching him. She had taken a step closer. There was no fear in her face, only recognition. The kind that couldn't be rehearsed or faked. The kind that came from something real. Henry finally found his voice, though it came out low and tight. "Who is she?" Thomas swallowed. His gaze dropped to the ground. "Her name is Emma." "That's not what I asked." Thomas took a breath. "She's my granddaughter. My daughter Laura's little girl." Henry's eyes narrowed. A name was falling into place now. Laura, the woman from the Miami conference. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a soft laugh. One night, no strings, no contact after. He hadn't forgotten her. He just never expected to see her again. And now, standing in front of him, was a living reminder. A child. A mirror. He turned slowly, gaze still fixed on the girl. "Where is Laura?" "She's inside," Thomas replied, barely above a whisper. "She's been staying with me since Emma was born. Her mother, Laura's mother, passed away shortly after. We didn't know how to reach you." Henry's jaw tightened. His pulse thundered behind his eyes. He could feel everything unraveling. The carefully ordered structure of his life. The concrete truth of who he thought he was. What he thought was possible. The child, Emma, was still looking at him. Still hopeful, still certain. Henry couldn't look away. Somehow, in that single moment, everything he thought he knew about himself, his past, his future, had been rewritten by a girl in a blue dress who called him Daddy. And part of him, the part that had long stopped believing in fate or second chances, was whispering something wild and dangerous. What if it was true? What if she really was his? What if he had just come home to everything he never knew he was missing? The door creaked open slowly as Henry stepped into the house he owned, but suddenly no longer recognized. The warm beige walls, the polished floors, Even the faint scent of cedar from the cleaning crew. Everything was the same, and yet everything had changed. His steps echoed through the hallway as he made his way to the sitting room. He didn't call out. He didn't demand. He simply walked forward, fueled by instinct and adrenaline. He didn't know what he would say, only that he needed to see her, and there she was. Laura Reeves stood by the window, her back to him. Her light blonde hair was pulled into a loose braid that hung over her shoulder. She wore a soft blue dress, the same shade as her daughter's. The evening sun streamed in behind her, wrapping her in a pale glow that made her look almost ghost-like. She turned slowly as if she already knew he was there. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Henry stared at her, taking in every detail. The curve of her jaw, the pale freckles on her cheek, the eyes that hadn't changed a bit since that night in Miami. Eyes that had been full of laughter and wine and secrets. Eyes that now held something entirely different. She was the same woman, and completely different. Laura's voice was quiet when it came. "I was wondering how long it would take you to come in." Henry's throat was dry. He took a step forward, then another. "That girl, Emma," she said softly. "She called me Daddy." Laura didn't blink. "I know." He stopped just a few feet from her. "Is she mine?" Laura exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Yes." That single word cracked the air open like lightning. Henry stumbled back half a step, as if the weight of her confirmation physically struck him. He ran a hand over his mouth, trying to make sense of the flood inside him. Anger, confusion, awe, disbelief, relief. "I was told I couldn't have children," he said, barely able to trust his own voice. Laura nodded. "I didn't know that. Are you sure?" She crossed the room and opened a drawer in the cabinet. From it, she pulled out a slim, worn folder. Slowly, she handed it to him. Inside were copies of medical bills, ultrasounds, a birth certificate. Emma Reeves. Mother, Laura Reeves. Father, unknown. "She was conceived that night in Miami," Laura said. "I wasn't with anyone else. I didn't even plan on being with you. It just happened. I tried to find you afterward, but I didn't have your real number. You left early the next morning, and all I knew was your name. Henry. No last name. No company. Nothing." He looked at the documents, his hands trembling. His heart was pounding in his ears. "Why didn't you try harder?" "I did," she replied. "I wrote to the conference center. I searched online. There are hundreds of Henrys in finance. And then, life happened. I found out I was pregnant. My mother got sick. I moved back in with my father. And then she died right after Emma was born." Henry sat down. The leather chair groaned beneath him, but he barely noticed. He felt hollow and full at the same time. "I missed everything," he whispered. "Her birth, her first steps, her first words." "She didn't say Daddy until 2 months ago," Laura said gently. "She saw your photo, one I kept, from a brochure the conference gave out. She asked who you were, and I told her the truth, that you were someone I once knew, someone kind, someone important. And she just decided? She said, 'He has my eyes. I think he's mine.' And she started calling you Daddy." Henry covered his face with both hands. He wasn't a man prone to tears. Not even funerals had broken him. But now, alone in this room with a woman he barely knew and a child who might be the best part of him, he felt dangerously close to unraveling. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. Laura sat down across from him. "I don't expect anything from you." "I don't believe you," he said, meeting her eyes. "Not really. You may not say it, but you wouldn't have stayed here if part of you didn't want me to find out." Her jaw tightened. She didn't argue. "I wanted Emma to have a chance to know," she said. "I didn't want her growing up wondering." Henry stood, paced to the window and stared out at the garden. Emma was there again, picking dandelions with Thomas. She was humming to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her father. Father. The word echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. "Is she happy?" he asked. "She's full of love," Laura said. "She has questions, but she's never wanted for joy." He nodded slowly. "Then I won't take her from you." Laura stiffened slightly. "That's not what I'm afraid of." "What are you afraid of?" "That you'll disappear again. That you'll come close enough for her to fall in love with you, and then leave." Henry turned around, wounded. I'm not that man. I don't know who you are, Henry, she said. Not anymore. One night isn't a foundation, and we've lived a lot of life since then. He stepped closer. Then give me a chance to prove who I can be. She studied him for a long moment. Not for me, she said. For her, he agreed. Only for her. And in that moment, Laura saw something in him she hadn't expected. Not panic, not ego, not retreat, but raw, unpolished vulnerability. And a man trying, truly trying, to understand how to carry the weight of a little girl's hope. She nodded once. One step at a time. He nodded back, eyes never leaving hers. One step, and in another part of the house, the girl with his eyes and her mother's heart began humming a new tune. One she didn't know would be the beginning of everything. The house was quiet the next morning. Too quiet for someone used to the hum of emails, boardroom chatter, and the distant clicking of polished shoes against marble floors. Henry stood in the doorway of the garden, coffee in hand, watching as Emma wandered among the roses barefoot, a small stick in her hand like it was a sword or a magic wand. She was talking to herself, or perhaps to the butterflies, in a soft voice spinning in slow, lopsided circles. He had barely slept the night before. His mind had been spinning, past the shock of the DNA test he hadn't yet taken, past Laura's measured honesty, and into something more fragile. The raw, paralyzing fear that he wouldn't be enough, that it was too late to become a father, that he would get it wrong and break something too precious to fix. He took a deep breath and stepped outside, the morning air brisk against his face. The moment his foot crunched softly on the gravel path, Emma turned. She smiled instantly, a wide, unfiltered beam of light that nearly knocked the air out of his lungs. "Hi again," she called as if this were all completely ordinary. "Hi," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "Can I come closer?" She nodded enthusiastically. "You're allowed. Mommy said so." He approached slowly, careful not to move too fast or too close. She didn't back away. In fact, she walked up to him, holding the stick proudly. "This is my wand," she declared. "It grants one wish, only one." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Have you used it yet?" She shook her head solemnly. "I was saving it." "For what?" She paused, looked up at him with a tilt of her head and said, "I think I already got what I wished for." The words hit him like a wave. He tried to smile, but his throat felt too tight. "Oh yeah? What was it?" "I wanted someone to talk to who doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby," she said seriously. "And who knows how to make pancakes. Mommy's always burn." He laughed softly. "I might be able to help with both." "Are you nervous?" she asked suddenly, squinting up at him. That stunned him. "Why would I be nervous?" "Because grown-ups get weird when they don't know what to do. You're being careful." Henry looked down at her, 4 years old, maybe 40 in soul, and exhaled. "You're right," he said. "I'm very nervous." She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were so small, barely curling around two of his, but her grip was confident. "You don't have to be," she said simply. "You're doing okay." He didn't know what to say. No business negotiation, no billion-dollar merger had ever made him feel as vulnerable as this small act of trust from someone who didn't know the whole truth, but somehow already saw him. They sat on a stone bench near the lilac bush. She kicked her legs while he sat silently beside her, letting the stillness settle between them. "Do you like being rich?" she asked suddenly. The question startled him. He turned to look at her. "It helps," he said honestly. "It means I can help others and buy a lot of books." She nodded. "Books are good." There was another pause. Then she looked down at her dress. "Mommy says you were surprised to see me." "I was," he admitted. "Were you mad?" He shook his head instantly. "No, never." She was quiet a moment longer, then whispered, "I was scared you'd go away." Henry's heart broke a little. He crouched down so they were eye to eye. "I don't want to go anywhere," he said, "but I might need to learn how to stay. I've never done this before." "Me either," she said with a grin, "so we'll both be new." Something shifted in him then, something deep and permanent. He didn't need proof. He didn't need more paperwork. He only needed this moment, this quiet pact between two people who had lost time, but found each other anyway. He took out the folded napkin in his pocket, On it, he had drawn a little bunny and a lion, holding hands. "I made this," he said, offering it to her. Emma gasped. "They're friends. They're learning how to be. I love them. You can keep it." She held it gently like it was glass, then suddenly jumped off the bench and darted toward the house. "Where are you going?" he called. "To make a room for the bunny and lion," she shouted. "They need a bed." Henry watched her disappear through the open door, her laughter trailing behind her like music. He sat back slowly, arms resting on his knees, and looked up at the sky. He wasn't sure what kind of father he would be, but he knew now he had to try. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because of something Emma had given him in a single morning. Hope, not loud or dramatic, just steady and enough. Henry stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, unmoving. His reflection stared back at him with the same dark eyes that now haunted his thoughts. The same eyes that looked up at him from the little girl in the garden. He hadn't shaved. He hadn't changed suits in 2 days. The usually sharp, immaculate CEO had been replaced by someone who felt unfinished, raw, almost fragile. The bathroom was pristine, but it felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that magnifies the noise inside your own head. The decision had been inevitable. He needed to know. Not because he doubted Laura, not even because he didn't believe Emma's resemblance, but because something inside him demanded a final, irrefutable truth. He had spent his entire adult life operating on facts, spreadsheets, contracts, numbers that made sense. Feelings were secondary. Data was king. And this wasn't data. This was a question that lived in his chest, that twisted deeper with every laugh from Emma and every glance from Laura, that held a kind of reluctant tenderness. The doctor had come discreetly the morning after his walk with Emma. A private test, DNA swab, fast processing. No one from the outside world would know. Henry had sat in silence after the doctor left, his hand still gripping the envelope containing the test ID. It would take 3 days, 3 impossibly long days, and in that time, everything inside him unraveled. He didn't work, didn't return calls, let meetings get rescheduled. The board would survive without him for a few days. He told himself this was temporary, but in truth he wasn't sure what he'd be when it ended. Whether the results said yes or no, some part of him already knew he was never going to walk away the same. He spent those days in the in-between. He sat with Emma again, who showed him her collection of plastic animals and gave each one a name. He helped Laura in the kitchen once, awkwardly chopping carrots too thick, while she tried not to laugh. They spoke more. Carefully, honestly. Sometimes late into the night, with mugs of tea they barely touched. He learned that Laura had gone back to school after Emma was born, that she had studied early childhood education, that she painted when she had time, mostly abstract pieces in soft blues and grays. He asked her questions about her favorite books, her worst fears, her happiest memory, and she answered without pretense. She didn't ask about his past relationships, or why he never married, or why his penthouse was filled with art he didn't care about. And that, somehow, made him want to tell her everything. By the 3rd day, he was hollow with anticipation. He checked his email at 5:17 a.m., pacing the kitchen floor like a man waiting for a verdict. When the notification came, results available, his hand hovered over the screen. For a full minute, he stared at it, his breath shallow. Then he opened it, and everything inside him stilled. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. He read it again, and again. He sat down hard, the phone slipping from his hand and landing on the table with a soft thud. His heart felt like it wasn't just beating, it was cracking open. He was a father, truly, irrefutably, fully. Emma was his. He laughed once, a dry, broken sound, and then lowered his head to his hands. Not in regret, not in confusion, but in something deeper, something that had no name. A mixture of gratitude and grief for the years already lost, for the birthdays missed, for the first steps, the first words, the sleepless nights that had belonged to someone else. But more than that, it was relief, because now he had a starting point, a place to begin again. Later that morning, he found Laura in the backyard, sipping her coffee while watching Emma play with a hula hoop that was far too big for her. She looked up at him, eyes curious but unreadable. "Well?" she asked quietly. He didn't speak. He just held out his phone with the results on screen. She looked, read, said nothing, then nodded once. Okay, that's all? He asked, stunned. She looked up, face calm. I already knew. He laughed, half sighing. Why is it that you're the one always grounded in this? I'm the one falling apart. She shrugged. I've had 4 years to fall apart and put myself back together. He watched her for a moment, then said, I want to do better. I want to be there for her, however I can, not just as a name on a paper. Laura studied his face. Do you mean that? Yes. Then start showing up. He nodded slowly. I already want to. Emma saw him from across the lawn and waved so hard her whole body wobbled. She shouted, Watch me spin! He lifted his hand in return. I'm watching. And he was, fully. For the first time in his life, Henry Weston wasn't watching numbers or stocks or quarterly returns. He was watching his daughter, and nothing in the world mattered more than that. It wasn't one big moment that changed things. No sudden lightning strike of realization or grand act of redemption. Instead, it was a series of small, almost invisible steps that, over time, turned Henry Weston from a stranger into something Emma began to trust, into something like home. He started showing up. Every morning, even before the sun was fully up, Henry would be in the kitchen making a mess of the stove. The first few attempts at pancakes were near disasters. One too thin, another burnt, a third somehow raw in the middle. But Emma, sitting cross-legged on the counter in her pajamas, treated each one like it was a delicacy from a 5-star chef. She even gave them names. This one's Sir Wiggleburn, she declared, holding up a lopsided one with enthusiasm. Henry laughed, truly laughed. The kind that came from deep in his chest, not his throat. He sounds brave. He survived the fire, she said solemnly, then immediately giggled and stuffed half of Sir Wiggleburn into her mouth. Laura watched them from the archway that first morning, leaning silently against the doorframe. She didn't interrupt, just observed. She wasn't sure what to call what was happening. Not reconciliation, not yet. But she saw something between them that felt like momentum, like two pieces of something cracked slowly turning to face each other. Henry, for his part, was still learning. There were missteps. Once he bought Emma an elaborate dollhouse, imported, handcrafted, absurdly expensive. She opened the box and blinked at it without expression. Where's the tape? She asked. Tape? For making the boxes, she said, as if it were obvious. He blinked. Boxes? I like making my own houses, she said, picking up an old Amazon package from the floor. This one's already a bakery. Henry stared at the ornate dollhouse, then back at the beat-up cardboard box with marker scribbles and plastic dinosaurs lounging on the roof. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Let's build the second floor. She beamed. They spent hours taping paper walls, cutting windows, and drawing tiny furniture on scraps of paper. By the end of the day, Henry had a paper cut, glue in his hair, and absolutely no desire to return to anything that required a boardroom or suit. His world had become smaller and infinitely more vibrant, and Emma was changing too. She asked questions, a lot of them, sometimes about him. What was your favorite toy when you were little? And sometimes about the universe. If stars are dead, why do they still shine? And Henry, used to managing empires, suddenly found himself Googling things like, how to explain gravity to a 4-year-old and easy slime recipes that won't ruin floors. But the biggest shift came one rainy afternoon. Henry arrived late. Traffic had been brutal, and a last-minute call with an investor had run long. He walked into the house already rehearsing his apology. He found Emma curled up on the couch with Laura, a book half open in her lap, her thumb in her mouth. I'm sorry, he said softly. Got stuck. Emma looked up. Her eyes were wide but not angry, just uncertain. You said you'd be here before the thunder, she whispered. His chest tightened. I know. I meant to. I should have been. She didn't say anything, but she didn't turn away either. He crouched in front of her. I can't promise I'll never be late, he said, but I'll always come back. She nodded after a moment, then reached forward and touched his cheek. Okay. That night she fell asleep on his chest as he sat in the rocking chair Laura had used when Emma was a baby. It was creaky and a little too small for his frame, but he didn't move, not even when his legs went numb. He just held her small hand gripping his shirt like an anchor, her breath slow and even. Laura walked in and stopped at the sight. Her expression was unreadable, a thousand emotions moving under the surface. But when Henry looked up at her, she didn't look away. "She trusts you," she said quietly. "I don't know if I deserve that," he replied. "She thinks you do." He looked down at the sleeping child in his arms, the child he didn't know existed just a few weeks ago, and felt a swell of emotion he didn't have a name for. Later, Laura brought him a blanket and tea. They sat in silence on the couch as Emma snored softly in the background. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. Henry glanced sideways. "Good or bad?" She smiled slightly. "Still deciding." He laughed under his breath. "Fair enough." She turned to him, serious now. "Why are you really doing this?" He met her gaze. "Because she's mine. Because she looks at me like I matter. And because for the first time in years, I want to wake up and be someone who doesn't just matter in headlines or earnings calls." She nodded, not speaking for a long time. Then finally she said, "Just don't disappear." "I won't." And somehow they both believed it. Because in the quiet after the storm, in the soft breathing of a sleeping child, and in the shared silence of two people who had walked through very different kinds of loss, there was something starting. Not perfection, but family. The kind you don't choose on purpose. The kind that chooses you. The weeks began to blend together in soft, golden ways. Not in the chaotic, high-stress blur Henry had grown used to in his corporate life, but in the kind of slow, intentional rhythm that people described as real living. He found himself waking up earlier than usual, not for meetings or international calls, but because Emma had started knocking gently on his door every morning, barefoot and grinning, holding a new drawing in one hand, and asking if he was ready for dad breakfast. Her eggs were always slightly undercooked, and she insisted on putting blueberries in everything, including toast. But Henry wouldn't have changed a thing. And Laura, she had become something steady in his life again. Not like in Miami. That version of her had been dazzling and mysterious. This Laura was strong, tired sometimes, wary, but real. Her laughter wasn't polite anymore. It was unfiltered. When she cried, she didn't hide it. When she didn't like something, she told him. And Henry, who had always surrounded himself with people who edited their thoughts before speaking, found himself craving her honesty like air. They had started talking more after Emma was asleep. Long, slow conversations over lukewarm tea on the back porch, or while folding laundry together in companionable silence. He learned that Laura loved thunderstorms, hated olives, and once dreamed of traveling the world before Emma was born. She confessed that motherhood had been both the hardest and most beautiful detour of her life. He confessed that he had no idea who he was outside of work, and was afraid to find out. It was on a Sunday evening, after a quiet dinner of grilled cheese and soup, that it happened. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch mid-movie, her body curled up in a tangled pile of blankets and stuffed animals. Henry had been half listening to the credits roll when Laura brought in 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed him one, and they sat there watching the girl they both loved more than their own comfort. "She's starting to call you Daddy more often now," Laura said softly, without looking at him. "I noticed. She trusts you." "I hope so." Silence stretched between them again, but not the awkward kind. It was warm, safe. Then Henry took a breath, staring into his mug. "I've been thinking about something." Laura turned toward him. "About what?" He didn't answer right away. He was afraid of the weight of his own words, of what they might mean, and how they might be received. "I want to build something permanent," he said at last. She didn't respond, and that silence, or for the first time in weeks, made his stomach twist. "With you," he added. "With her. With both of you." She blinked. "You mean—" "I want you to move in. Officially. Not just here and there. Not just as visitors in my life. I want to make this your home. Our home." She stared at him, visibly stunned. "Henry, and that's a lot." "I know. We've only just found our rhythm." "I know. What if it's too soon?" He looked at her now. Really looked. "Laura, I'm not asking you to rush anything. I'm not saying we have to get married tomorrow, or even decide anything beyond the next step. I'm just saying, I want you here. Every day. I want to wake up and know that Emma is under this roof. that you're not packing bags on the weekends, that this isn't something temporary. She was quiet again. Then she asked, "Is this about guilt?" "No." His voice was firm, steady. "It's about love, and about not wasting any more time pretending I'm not already wrapped up in this. In you. In her. I'm not perfect, Laura. God knows I've lived most of my life guarded and half present. But being with you too, it's the first thing that's ever felt real. Not impressive, not profitable, just right." She sat back, visibly overwhelmed. Her fingers trembled slightly around the handle of her mug. "Do you know how long I've done this on my own?" she whispered. "How many nights I stayed up worrying about rent or diapers, or whether Emma would ever have a father figure who'd actually stay." Henry reached across the space between them and took her free hand. "I can't change the past. I can't take away the struggle, but I can choose to show up now and keep choosing it day after day." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, her defenses slipped. "And what happens when you get tired of all this? When the novelty wears off?" "I don't think this is novelty," he said. "I think this is finally finding what I never knew I was missing." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, breathing through the fear that years of disappointment had carved into her. And then she nodded. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way. Just a quiet, small nod. The kind that meant, yes, I'm scared, but yes, I'm ready to try. Henry exhaled. It felt like air after years of holding his breath. They both looked at Emma again. Still sleeping. Still safe. "She's going to want her own room," Laura murmured. "I'll build her one. With a slide." Laura laughed, the sound breaking something tender open between them. "She'll expect cookies before bed. I'll learn to bake. And what if I snore? I'll buy earplugs." They smiled at each other. That night, Henry walked into the guest room and found Laura tucking Emma in. The little girl stirred, half awake. "Daddy," she mumbled. He stepped forward and brushed the hair from her face. "Right here, sweetheart." She sighed and fell back into sleep, as if that answer was enough. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, it was. The rain had come suddenly, pounding the roof in rhythmic waves that echoed through the quiet house. Outside, the wind danced with the branches of the tall sycamore trees, sending leaves skittering across the patio like whispers. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon. Henry had tried making cookies again, this time with Emma's very particular instruction. They must be shaped like stars or they won't taste magical. Emma was sprawled on the rug in the living room, humming to herself while coloring a picture of their family. She drew Henry with a crown and a briefcase, Laura with wings and a book, and herself in a glittery dress. Blue, of course. Always blue. Henry was in the kitchen, carefully scraping burned cookie crumbs off a baking sheet. Laura was upstairs, digging through boxes in the closet for a missing umbrella, when she stumbled across something she hadn't seen in years. It was small, folded carefully and tucked between two books. A pale blue envelope, yellowing slightly with time, her name printed on the front in her own handwriting. No stamp, no address, just one word on the back flap in pencil. Henry. Her breath caught. It was the letter. She sat on the floor, the umbrella forgotten beside her, and unfolded the single page. It was written the night she found out she was pregnant. Her hands had shaken so badly she'd nearly torn the paper. The words were rushed, raw, equal parts fear and hope, clinging to memory. "Dear Henry, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm not even sure I'll send it, but I need to say it. I think I'm pregnant. I'm late, and I'm terrified. Not because I regret anything. I don't. That night with you was the most unexpected, beautiful thing that's ever happened to me. You were kind, funny, human. You saw me. I wish I had a way to reach you. I wish I had asked for more than your first name. If this child is yours, I hope they have your eyes, your stillness, your grace, and if you never know, I hope you're okay. I hope you're still out there building skyscrapers and sipping overpriced coffee and being someone good. Love." Laura didn't realize she was crying until a tear hit the corner of the page. Downstairs, Emma had grown quiet, and that silence, that particular kind that meant something was being explored, tugged Laura out of her moment. She came down the stairs slowly, clutching the letter in one hand. When she reached the landing, she saw her daughter curled up in the armchair, holding something in her lap. Her tiny fingers gripped the blue envelope, the one Laura had set on the table without thinking while grabbing a glass of water. Emma looked up. "Is this your?" she asked. Laura froze. "Yes, baby. That's private." Emma's brow furrowed, her voice curious, not accusatory. "You wrote to Daddy?" I I meant to. A long time ago?" Emma glanced down at the letter, her finger tracing the loops in the handwriting. "Why didn't you send it?" Laura sat beside her, suddenly unsure of how much truth to offer a 4-year-old. But Emma was perceptive. She always had been. "Because I was scared," Laura said honestly, "and because I didn't know how to find him." "But he found us." "Yes." Emma tilted her head. "Does he know you loved him then?" Laura's breath caught. She opened her mouth to reply, but another voice answered. "I do now." Both turned. Henry stood in the doorway, cookie sheet forgotten, his eyes fixed on the letter in Emma's lap. He didn't look angry. He didn't look shocked. He looked changed. Emma slid off the chair and ran to him. "She wrote to you a long time ago." Henry crouched and lifted her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for showing me." Laura stood slowly, eyes locked on his. "I didn't mean for you to see that." "I'm glad I did." He walked forward, still holding Emma, and handed her gently to Laura. Then he took the letter, unfolded it again, and read it. This time, not as a stranger, but as a man standing at the center of a truth he had once been on the edges of. When he looked up, his eyes were glassy. "You thought I'd forget you," he said softly. "I thought I'd never see you again," Laura replied. "And you hoped she'd have my eyes." Laura nodded. Henry laughed under his breath, touching the corner of his eye. "She does, but she has your soul." They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with old emotions and new understanding. Then Emma reached out and placed both of their hands together in hers. "You can love each other now," she said seriously. "Because I already do." Neither adult moved for a long breath. Then Henry turned his hand and intertwined his fingers with Laura's. "Let's not write any more letters we never send," he said. "Let's just say the things." Laura smiled through her tears. "Okay." That night, as the rain continued outside, they curled up on the couch together, all three of them, under a pile of mismatched blankets and dreams they were no longer afraid to share. The letter stayed on the coffee table. Not forgotten, but finally finished. The morning sky was soft and golden, the kind of morning that wrapped around the earth gently, like a quiet promise. There was no fanfare, no parade of grand gestures or scheduled surprises. Just sunlight slipping through white curtains, the sound of birds waking up, and the slow rhythm of life that had begun to settle inside the Weston house like something sacred. Henry sat on the back porch, dressed casually for once, a cup of coffee warming his hands. He watched Emma in the yard, bundled in a sweater 3 sizes too big, chasing bubbles like they were treasure. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and vanilla. Laura's doing. She had lit a candle in the kitchen earlier, while humming a song he didn't recognize. It had been 2 months since the letter. 2 months since the quiet shift. From something uncertain to something that felt impossibly like home. Laura and Emma had moved in officially just 3 weeks before. There was no big announcement, no ribbon-cutting moment. Their things had simply begun to fill the house. A pair of glittery sneakers by the door, a ceramic mug with Laura's initials in the cabinet, Emma's drawings taped, without permission, on the fridge and pantry. And Henry, he had changed too. The man who had once controlled boardrooms and feared vulnerability now spent half his mornings Googling how to braid a child's hair, and his evenings falling asleep with one arm draped across a tiny body and the other around a woman who had once been a single night, but had become everything. And yet one thing still tugged at him quietly. A question, a possibility, a hope. He didn't believe in fate or luck. He believed in showing up. And so that morning, he went inside and opened the drawer beside his bed. It was there, a small box he'd picked out weeks earlier, but hadn't dared to open since. He held it now, not like a man with a plan, but like a man holding his entire future in the palm of his hand. He found Laura in the hallway, standing in front of Emma's room, folding the child's tiny laundry with quiet focus. She looked up as he approached and smiled. "You're unusually quiet today," she said, teasing. "I'm thinking." That's always dangerous. He chuckled, stepped closer, and kissed her cheek. "Walk with me?" She nodded and followed him through the patio door. They stood together in the garden, just out of sight of Emma, who was now lying in the grass, whispering something to the sky. Henry looked at Laura and took a slow, grounding breath. Then he handed her the box. She stared at it, then at him. "Is this what I think it is?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I mean, yes, technically, but not in the usual way." She opened it slowly. Inside wasn't a diamond. There was no gold band, no traditional ring. Instead, there was a small silver charm, a lion holding the paw of a bunny. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly. "She gave me the idea," he said. "She said the lion protects, and the bunny believes. I thought maybe we're both." She looked up at him, completely undone. "I'm not proposing marriage," he said carefully. "Not yet. I mean, maybe someday, but right now I'm proposing something else." "What?" "I want this," he said. "Us. The three of us. I want to keep choosing it, every day. Not because we have to, but because we get to. Because it matters more than anything I ever thought would." She was crying now. Not dramatically, just softly. The way people cry when they realize they're safe. Emma had gotten up and was slowly approaching, barefoot and curious. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the box. Laura crouched down and showed her. "It's for us." "For all of us?" Emma asked, eyes wide. Henry knelt beside them, his voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart. For all of us." Emma clapped her hands. "Does that mean I get to stay forever?" Henry smiled, his throat tight. "If you want to." Emma leaned forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. "Then I wish on it." Laura laughed through her tears. "You can't wish on jewelry." "Yes, I can," Emma said stubbornly. "This is our magic. You said we're a story. This is the part where they promise." Henry looked at Laura. "She's not wrong." Laura smiled through her tears and nodded. Then, without needing permission, Emma placed the little charm in her mother's palm, covered it with both hands, and whispered, "We promise." Later that night, Henry tucked Emma into bed while Laura read one last story beside her. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that used to echo with loneliness, but the kind that hummed with love. Emma yawned and whispered, "Daddy?" "Yes, baby?" "Do you think bunnies and lions stay friends forever?" He looked at Laura, then back at Emma. "I think the best ones do." And that night, as the stars blinked awake overhead, a CEO turned father, a woman who never meant to stay, and a little girl who believed in magic, slept under the same roof, bound not by blood alone, but by the simplest, hardest, truest thing. They chose each other, and they would keep choosing every day after. Forever wasn't a ceremony or a contract. It was this love, this home. The ending of this story is intentionally quiet, not flashy or dramatic, but deeply human. I wanted Henry's journey to come full circle, not with a sudden transformation, but through the accumulation of choice, choosing to show up, to listen, to love. In a world that often glorifies grand gestures, I think there's something powerful about a man learning that the most extraordinary thing he can do is be present. Laura's arc is equally essential. Her trust wasn't won, it was earned. She didn't need rescuing, she needed consistency. Her strength lies in her vulnerability, in her willingness to open the door again after years of closing it to protect herself and her daughter. And Emma, she is the quiet heart of the story, not just the reason they find each other, but the reason they stay. Her belief in love, in magic, in lions and bunnies being friends, that's the hope the story rests on. The ending is soft, but it's strong. It says, family doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Sometimes it's made from broken parts, chosen again and again, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. That, to me, is the most honest kind of happy ending.